And immediately after World War I, the late 19 teens, the country experiences a brief recession as we kind of transition from wartime production to peacetime production. So we go from this total war effort where we're producing tons and tons of military goods and we're selling those goods overseas. We're going back to civilian production, producing things like cars, not televisions yet, radios, household appliances, etc. The 1920s, in the 1920s, we also return to isolationism. Okay, we decide that we do not want to be entangled in European affairs. It's part of the reason we do not ratify the Treaty of Versailles. It's the reason we don't want to join the League of Nations. We want to focus on domestic policy. A lot of Americans have become disillusioned with the war. That term disillusioned means that they started questioning, what our role is in society. They become, I don't want to say disappointed, but they don't necessarily want to be involved in foreign conflicts. That's very traumatic for a country to experience. And World War I is pretty traumatic because lots and lots of young men don't come home from the war. And some that do are, at the time, what we call shell-shocked, what we now know to be experiencing PTSD. And those people are struggling to readjust to civilian life. So we isolate. We go back to being an isolationist country. We don't want to get involved in other countries' problems. Economically, we experience a very brief recession as we transition to civilian production. That's not going to be long lasting. In fact, the 1920s, after we get through this recession, the 1920s is going to be pretty prosperous for a lot of people. Not for everybody, but for a lot of folks it will be. In terms of our agricultural sector, because we isolate, we put huge tariffs on Europe. That slows down trade for our farmers, and our farmers begin to struggle with being able to make money essentially on the produce that they are producing. Now, this is an issue we see repeatedly throughout U.S. history, where the farmers are encouraged to produce, and then they overproduce, and then the prices fall, and then the farmers struggle, and then we go through a conflict like World War I, where the farmers are again producing a ton of food so we can sell it to our allies overseas. Then when the war is over, they have all of this surplus, and they begin to struggle. So for the 1920s, for the farming community, or for the agricultural sector of our economy, it's going to be a struggle. But for the business sector and for people who are already wealthy, it is going to be quite a prosperous decade. There is political instability in other parts of the world. The Russian Revolution happens in 1917, and Russia completely withdraws from World War I. And so our concern really is that the Russian government has been overthrown and is now run by kind of communist revolutionaries. And we have a huge concern that that kind of revolutionary ideas are going to come across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States, and we experience what we call the first Red Scare. And that is this overwhelming fear of a communist takeover, that the working class people in America are going to overthrow our capitalist system and install a communist system, that we will no longer have a democratically elected leader, that we will fall into a dictatorship. So the 20s, while prosperous, is also a decade that is kind of overshadowed by this fear of communism. I already said it's called the Red Scare.
Attention jackets. The JDH shuttle leaves in 6 minutes. Please proceed to the back horseshoe.
And we experienced this twice in 2 major ways. In this first one, our reaction to our fear of communism is going to lead to people's homes being raided, people being deported from the country for being suspected communists. It's going to lead to suspicion of foreigners or immigrants coming into the country. It's going to lead to suspicion that your neighbors might be communist. But this first Red Scare is more contained. When we get into the second Red Scare, we're gonna shift our focus towards Americans rather than people coming from other countries, rather than focusing on immigrants. These raids that I was talking about are led by a guy named J. Mitchell Palmer. And J. Mitchell Palmer is the U.S. Attorney General, which means he's like the head of the Department of Justice. And what happens is an Italian anarchist, an Italian immigrant who happens to be an anarchist, explodes a bomb outside of J. Mitchell Palmer's home. And that kind of sets off this communist hysteria. Some other high-ranking officials, like judges and politicians, have their offices and their homes attacked too. And Mitchell Palmer is convinced that this is the beginning of a communist plot to take over the country. And so what he does then is start to investigate people that he believes have ties to the Russian Revolution, have ties to communism, and focuses a lot on Italian immigrants. J. Edgar Hoover is going to be the lead of these raids. They're called the Palmer raids because they're named after J. Mitchell Palmer, but it's going to be led by a guy named J. Edgar Hoover, who is the Assistant Attorney General of the United States, so Palmer's assistant. They're going to direct the raids of 4,000 suspected communists. They're going to enter these people's homes without warrants, and they're going to deport about 600 people. Overall, this leads to a kind of public distrust of immigrants and a push for immigration like reform. Yes? Oh, it's not. Without a warrant?
No.
No, right? That is a Fourth Amendment right to be protected against unlawful search and seizure. They have to have a warrant signed by a judge that allows them to enter the home. Now, they can come to your house and knock on your door, but you don't have to answer your door. If they don't have a warrant, you technically don't have to answer your door. Now, if they enter your home without a warrant, that is a violation of your constitutional rights. All right, so we have two Italian immigrants who are convicted of, essentially these are anarchists. These are people that are suspected of being communists. Their names are Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. They are convicted of committing a murder during a robbery. And the kind of idea is that this robbery was going to fund an anarchist revolution in the United States. And so they are both convicted of this murder and robbery, and they are sentenced to death. Now, the issue with their execution is that there wasn't sufficient evidence to say that that's exactly what they were doing, that they were plotting to have this anarchist revolution. However, the hysteria of the time and the public sentiment and the fear of Italian immigrants and of communist revolution and anarchist revolution makes it palatable for society to execute people who they believe are part of this kind of attempted communist takeover. So even though they are executed, and we look at that kind of in hindsight and say that was probably a violation of their rights to a fair trial, because the public accepted this, because the public was okay with it, it's not really challenged. Okay, hold on. I still gotta send this thing to Mr. Okay, we've talked about how, or I have told you about how attitudes towards immigrants change over time. And we've talked about the rise of nativism in the 1800s when we had a wave of immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe. And then that kind of wanes for a little while. The nativist sentiment does. So we kind of go through this peak of nativism, and then we kind of take a downward trend. In the 1920s, we're going to see the rise of nativism again. And I told you before that nativism is a dislike of foreigners. It is a dislike of people coming from other countries. Nativists have many different reasons why they don't like immigrants. It could be that these people are competing for jobs, immigrants depress wages, it could be that there's fear of communism, fear of anarchy, there's all kinds of different reasons. One of the underlying kind of foundational reasons that these folks in the 20s are nativists is because there is a belief in a racial hierarchy. Particularly, this racial hierarchy is spread throughout the United States, but it's strongest in the South. And it is the belief that white Protestant Americans are superior to any other people. That includes folks that are already living here, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and so on. In 1915, so after World War, or in the middle of World War I, a guy named D. Griffith. His last name is Griffith. Sorry, I can't remember his first name. I think it's D.W. He comes out with a film called The Birth of a Nation. And The Birth of a Nation is this story about how, hey guys. Oh, hello. What's going on?
Someone got attention.
You're not supposed to tell the class that. Mercy. Who allowed him to be an officer?
Who is that?
That's what's his name?
Michael.
Michael. I'm sorry, I couldn't remember his name. He used to sit in the front and do nothing but play on his phone, and then didn't understand why he wasn't passing the class. That guy? Okay. So, I think it's D.W. Griffith was his name. Anyway, he comes out with this movie, Birth of a Nation. And the story of Birth of a Nation is that white women need to be protected from particularly black men, but this could be applied really across any race that wasn't white. And in the film, there is this, it's a silent film, so there's no talking, it's all like drama, it's all theatrics. And there is this white woman, she's young, like maybe 20 years old, I don't know, she might even be a teenager. And she is being, I think it's her house, like where she lives, they have a servant who is a black man. And throughout the film, like they make him, it's a white actor in blackface. And they make him, like his ambiance, he seems kind of like evil and devilish. And he's always watching her, and he's, you know, it kind of implies that he's maybe having these thoughts about her, like he has a desire for her. And through the film, he ends up pursuing her, and the KKK comes in and rescues her. Well, tries to rescue her. She ends up committing suicide. But the idea was that the KKK was coming in to save these white women from these brutal black men. And that leads to a rise of, a resurgence, I should say, of the KKK as a prominent white supremacy group. But it's important to know that they don't just dislike black people, they dislike Jewish people, they dislike immigrants. And in I don't remember the year of this, maybe I don't remember the year. Anyway, they have a big Klan march on the Capitol, in front of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. So this is kind of the undertone of all of the feelings that Americans have about immigrants, about black people, about anyone who's not a white Protestant. And there is a strong fear in the South, I don't want to say fear, but a lot of white men in the South feel that they need to protect their Southern innocent white women from these so-called brutal black men. That is kind of our racial undertone of things, not just in the 20s, but these ideas are going to go all the way through the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and in some places, still to this day. Hello, Melissa. Where are you coming from?
Deployment?
Oh, did you check in?
Yes.
Okay. So in the 20s, we're going to see a lot of activity from the KKK. I don't know that we'll get into a lot of it in this unit, but we will talk a lot about the activity of the KKK when we get to the 60s. There are race riots that break out in many American cities. One of the more famous happens in Tulsa, where there is a prominent kind of wealthy black community there, and they end up getting attacked. The entire town is like burned down and bombed out. But I don't remember if that was at the direction of the FBI or at the direction of the, well, I don't think we have an FBI quite yet. Anyway, it was government sanctioned is the idea. No. So Tulsa is the most famous. There is another big one in Chicago, where a lot of African Americans had moved during during World War I to work in factories that were producing war goods. In the southern states in the 1920s, we see an increase in lynching. Y'all know what lynchings are?
Yeah.
What's a lynching person?
It's essentially like, where the people hold like essentially unsanctioned, like, when they believe justice and like kill people just because they think it's in
Okay, and who are they targeting for these lynchings?
black people.
Black people. Okay, so a lynching is an extrajudicial killing, meaning that it's not like somebody was found guilty of a crime and then they were hanged or they were executed for it. These are mobs of vigilantes who believe or accuse a black person of committing a crime, both male and female, and then they have these big public spectacles where they execute this person. A lot of them are by hanging, but some of them are being burned alive. Some of them are killed, with them being shot in the head, being beaten to death. And these lynchings really increase in the 1920s, or the 19-teens and the 1920s. They're used as a method of intimidation. If they believe that maybe the black community in that location is becoming too outspoken, too powerful, they're getting too many rights, then these lynchings will pick up in a way to intimidate them back into a position of submission. So where they kind of go, not into hiding necessarily, but where black people feel a little more scared to speak their mind or ask for equality or even talk about equality. And when we get into the 1960s, we'll look at some of the laws that go alongside these lynchings in the South that kind of justify these lynchings. Another part of lynching is that there was not a court in the southern part of the United States that was ever going to hold a white person accountable for killing a black person, because that was seen as like a betrayal to your race or a betrayal to white supremacy. And so a lot of these, actually, most of these lynchings go completely unpunished. There's no punishment for the mob that commits them. These were, I don't have pictures in here. These were like a Sunday afternoon form of entertainment. People would go to church in the morning, and then after church, they would come out to the hanging tree. And it would be, a huge public spectacle, where there would be hundreds of people who came to watch, including children. And it was meant to be intimidating for the black community, or really for any person of color, to not challenge the status quo, not challenge the fact that there is a racial hierarchy with white Protestant people at the top. In terms of politics, the 1920s are led completely by Republican presidents. And in this period of time, the Republican Party is very much laissez-faire. So hands off, the government does not interfere with businesses. So we see kind of a relaxing of like antitrust laws and anti-monopoly laws. The government passes tariffs, the Hawley-Smoot tariff in 1930, to try to protect U.S. manufacturers from foreign competition. One of the Smoot-Hawley tariff is the highest tariff in history, although that was as of the time this was written, or this PowerPoint was made, which was like 8 years ago now. I don't know if we have topped that in this current economy. This tariff was intended to help American farmers, American manufacturers, people like Henry Ford, some of these early assembly line producers, so that they didn't have to compete with products that were being made by foreign competitors. What happens as a result of this tariff is that there is a decline in worldwide trade, meaning that we don't have markets to sell our goods to, and other countries don't have a market or can't sell their goods to the United States. For a time being, for a short period of time, that's not too much of a problem. But when this happens over a longer period of time, several months to several years, it's going to deepen the depression that the United States falls into in the 1930s. Now, before the Smoot-Hawley tariff, there was already the Underwood tariff. So this tariff just increases tariffs that we already had on foreign countries. Republican politics of the 1920s were about lowering taxes on the wealthy and lowering taxes on big corporations because they believe in like a trickle-down effect. Okay, they believe that if you lower taxes for the wealthy or big corporations, the money they save that they're not having to give to the federal government, they can invest that money back into their business, or they can invest that money back into their employees, and then everybody is better because of it.
Even, well, so mine's a 715.
Go ahead, Harley. No, you're fine.
If anyone wants to fill this out, it's not living. We're like our.
That if you have a company that's making, $1 million, if they had to pay a tax rate at, like the graduated income rate that we have, they have to pay like 35 or 40% of their income in taxes. So the idea is if you give them a lower tax rate, say 10%, 15%, then that extra money that they didn't have to pay the government in taxes, they'll reinvest it in their business. They'll come up with new products, they'll come up with new methods of production, and they'll pay their employees better, their employees will get better benefits. And in theory, that sounds really good. In practice, that's not exactly how it works. In practice, what they do is they will invest some of that money back into the company for newer technology or better means of production, but it doesn't actually translate down to anything better for their employees. They take whatever they don't invest back into production, and they usually will buy stock with it or reinvest in their own company to own a bigger share, or do stock buybacks, which is a concept I don't quite understand fully. So on one hand, it's good because they're improving their business, but that's because they want to improve their profits. On the other hand, the employees don't get the benefit of that tax break that they were intended to get. Because the tax breaks were intended for companies to put that money back into production and better wages. They do part of it, but not the whole thing. And we'll see this in, like I can put this in numbers for you because we abandoned this policy in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s, and our economy is like booming. And then comes the 70s and 80s with the Reagan Revolution, and we go back to the same policy. And what happens is that wages remain the same or barely grow, but company profits are huge. The amount of taxes collected comes down, and what you see is the wealthier class of people, wealthier businesses get huge and super, super wealthy, while the middle class, the average everyday people that really are the backbone of our economy, shrinks and gets smaller and smaller because their wages are not going up to match like inflation and the economy. So in theory it sounds great, in practice it just hasn't worked out that great. Okay, so we talked about the taxes a little bit, lowering taxes on the wealthy and corporations. When those big corporations don't pay as much in taxes, the tax burden is then shifted to the middle class. We still have to collect money, right? We still have bills as a country we have to pay. We have to pay our military. We have to pay our elected officials. We have to take care of, at this time, not quite yet, but we take care of our elderly. We take care of our lower income families. We spend money on national security. There's all different things that as a government, that our government has to pay for. And that money doesn't fall out of the sky, it has to come from taxes. So if the wealthy are not paying a higher share of taxes, then the middle class has to pay the higher share of taxes. And that leads to a shrinking middle class. If you're not in economics yet, you'll learn about kind of how that works on the middle class in economics. But anyhow, okay, as far as antitrust laws, I already told you they're pretty laissez-faire because they're Republican presidents, which means they allow a lot of large businesses to merge together and form monopolies. And these presidents are gonna kind of look the other way because they believe that the backbone of the country is these businesses. And there is some truth to that, right? Because you don't have, people aren't working if there are not businesses to employ them. You don't have access to products if there's not a business that's producing them. So the shift in the balance between the companies and the working class is more in favor of companies during the 1920s. All three presidents of the 20s are Republican presidents. The first president is Warren G. Harding, and his campaign promise is return to normalcy. You do need to know return to normalcy. What return to normalcy means is that the entire 19 teens had been a tumultuous decade. We had been going through World War I, and after the war we have that brief recession. So what he is promising the American people is, let's go back to like life before World War I, when things were still easy. When you just went to work, you worked your job, you had your days off, etc. He wanted to focus on peacetime production and manufacturing in the United States and growing our manufacturing sector and isolating us from the rest of the world. And for that part, peacetime production does increase. Our business sector, manufacturing sector does experience a boom in the 1920s. Americans are going to have access to more products than they have ever had access to before, and we're going to start mass producing things. So rather than having a single person who makes shoes and a single person who makes shirts and a single person who makes pants, these things are going to be made on an assembly line in a factory, so that we have access to a lot of goods at a lower price. His foreign policy is isolationist, right? He refuses to join the League of Nations. He places very high tariffs on foreign countries to basically isolate the United States, protect American businesses as they're growing in the 20s, and he is going to restrict immigration. Domestically, he lowers taxes on the rich. He supports a bill for anti-lynching, as Ida B. Wells is raising awareness to the issue of lynching in the South. He does support a bill that would make it illegal, although that never gets passed through Congress. He resisted any anti-Semitism in the country or any dislike of Jewish people, and he pursued arms reduction to kind of reverse course on the issue of militarism or growing these really strong militaries. He wanted the United States to have a strong military, but he doesn't see a need to build up, this arsenal of force, because if we're isolated and we're protected by the oceans, we don't really need to have a strong military because we can just keep to ourselves at home. His weakness though, is that he gave a lot of the government position jobs to his friends. And those friends turned out to not be the most upstanding citizens. They're called the Ohio Gang. And what they do is they take some land that is owned by the federal government and they lease it to oil companies for those oil companies to drill on federal land. This is called the Teapot Dome scandal. These cabinet members who are involved in this scandal lease this government property in, I believe it's in Wyoming or Nebraska, somewhere up in like the central northwestern United States. It is an oil-rich area of land. And they lease it to some of their oil executive friends. And like a normal case, that wouldn't be a big deal, right? Those people drill the oil, the money, or they pay some lease payment to the federal government, and Americans who actually own that property, right? Federal property belongs to all Americans. Those Americans would benefit from leasing out this land to an oil company. But instead, what they do is they pocket that money that they're making off the lease for themselves. Okay, they take that money and keep it for themselves. This creates, when this gets exposed, this creates public distrust because they feel like these are Harding's people. He should have vetted them better. He shouldn't be letting his cabinet essentially steal money from the American people. And so that is really a stain on his presidency. Kind of what he is known for is the Teapot Dome scandal, not really anything else. Some of his cabinet members end up going to jail for this because it is a violation of the law, and that is his legacy as president, is the Teapot Dome scandal. He's involved in, the Ohio gang is involved in other scandals. I'm gonna skip past it because it's not really pertinent to our understanding of Harding. Now, Harding's vice president is a guy named Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge will win the election or take over when Harding dies and then elected to another term in 1924. He is a business guy. He's very pro-business, like all of the other Republican presidents of the 1920s. He believes that if you protect American businesses, we can grow to be a prosperous country. His motto is that the business of America is business. That is what our country should be known for, is our business, like our strength in our businesses. He continued a lot of Harding's pro-business policies. He's kind of one of those presidents that he doesn't really have much of a legacy other than being pro-business, being pro allowing businesses to kind of grow unhindered. He is called Silent Cow because he rarely speaks in public. He's pretty talented at doing nothing. He's there, okay? He's there to orchestrate that these businesses can grow during the 20s, and that's pretty much it. When I say that, like, he's nothing, right? He's just one of those presidents that doesn't do anything significant for us to know about. Now, when the economy crashes in 1929, he's not president anymore, but some Americans are going to blame him and his relaxed policies on businesses, his kind of unwillingness to stop business mergers and monopolies, his unwillingness to put higher taxes on wealthy businesses, and the fact that he's putting all of these foreign tariffs on foreign countries. They're going to blame him, at least in part, for the Great Depression. But his predecessor, a guy named Herbert Hoover, is really going to take the fall for the Great Depression. So Herbert Hoover is the third president of the 1920s. He had served as the Secretary of Commerce under Calvin Coolidge. Now, Hoover recognizes in the 1920s that there are some problems. These business monopolies were becoming a problem. These high tariffs might cause some problems. And so he does warn Coolidge that maybe the government should not completely abandon laissez-faire, but should regulate businesses at least a little bit. And in particular, Hoover's biggest worry is the stock market. And he's concerned about the stock market because there is no regulation. There's no rules about what you can buy and how you buy it. And a lot of Americans are borrowing money from banks in order to go and buy stock. And then when the stock market crashes, they can't pay back the banks, and the banks then lose everybody's money that was deposited in their accounts. So Hoover sees this kind of early on, and he warns Coolidge about it, but Coolidge decides to do nothing. He believes, Herbert Hoover believes in a concept called rugged individualism. Rugged individualism is you are responsible for you. Okay, it is not the job of the government to take care of you. It is not the responsibility of your parents, your friends, your neighbors, your children. Well, maybe when you're super old, your children take care of you. But you are responsible for carving out your own path. If you've ever heard the term, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, meaning you put in the hard work, you reap what you sow. And so kind of where this bites him in the butt is that when the stock market crashes and when the country slips into an economic recession, he refuses to do anything. He believes that everybody should just be responsible for themselves. He believes that if you get too much government help, you're gonna lose your incentive or your initiative to go out and work. Therefore, the government really shouldn't be helping. If somebody wants to help the poor or be charitable, that should be the job of the church, not the job of the government. And so he really holds tight to that even when it becomes very clear that even the churches can't help people. All right. Hold on, y'all. Let me see how much I can. I'm not doing all those questions, don't worry. Okay, I'm gonna try to get through prosperity. This is easy. It looks like a lot, but it's really not. What's what? Oh. Okay, so we're looking at why is the 1920s so prosperous? So there are 5 reasons that the United States is prosperous in the 1920s. Number 1, the availability of the automobile. Henry Ford makes the automobile available. Actually, don't write all these down at one time. Let's write them. I have a slide for each one, so let's do it that way. All right, so the automobile. Then you can put all your notes under automobile. Henry Ford invents he doesn't really invent it, he kind of steals it from somebody else. But he invents a process for manufacturing vehicles that does not require any skilled labor. If you do it on the assembly line, then you have every person on that line doing the exact same job over and over and over and over again all day long. His first vehicle that he builds on the assembly line is the Model T. And how it would work is that you would have one person who straightens the frame, one person who puts in the bolts, one person that puts on the wheels as the vehicle is moving down the assembly line in front of you. You stay in one position all day long and do the exact same job over and over and over. Well, when you do it a lot, you become good at it. You could do it in your sleep. You could close your eyes and still tighten that same bolt over and over and over again. This allows him to push a Model T off the assembly line every 4 seconds. Now he's mass producing these cars, and with mass production, what happens when we have a lot of something? What happens to the price? It goes down, right? So now we have what he dubs the car for the common man. It's mass produced, so the price of it is very low, and he prides himself on that because he wants even his own workers and his own plants to be able to afford his cars. So with the availability of the Model T, we have the widespread kind of purchase of automobiles for the first time. The impact of that is that many people are going to work in the automobile industry, working in these manufacturing plants, mostly up around the Great Lakes. Detroit is a huge place for automobile manufacturing, or was. So you got a lot of people working there. Plus, because the automobile requires a lot of different pieces and products to be put together, you stimulate other parts of the economy. You stimulate the steel industry and the glass industry and the rubber industry. So it's a boost for everyone, not just for Henry Ford. At the same time, you now have the ability to live a distance away from your job. If you want to work, for instance, in downtown Houston at the Med Center, you don't have to live there. You can live in the suburbs and drive back and forth to work every day. So we see the growth of the suburbs as a result of the automobile. Because of the assembly line, we have point number 2, which is the rise of new industries, or the availability of new products. The assembly line is then adopted by other manufacturers to produce all kinds of stuff that we just kind of take for granted, things that we would find in everybody's house right now. Things like the toaster and the electric shaver and recliner chairs and the early versions of washing machines and all kinds of household appliances, vacuums, refrigerators, and so on. The other popular item that is mass produced in the 20s that everybody wants is the radio, because the radio connects us to each other in a way we had never been connected before. So think about the impact of social media on you. You all have access to things happening all over the globe. The radio gives Americans access to things like the kind of infancy, I would say, of social media, access to information or a common shared culture within the United States. The radio is really going to transform American culture because for the first time we are connected to each other no matter which region of the country we live in. And then we have the invention of the transatlantic telephone service, meaning long distance phone calls across the ocean, back to Europe, Asia, whatever. That is going to revolutionize business. Now it's going to take time, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to revolutionize the way we do business. Rather than having to go down to the store and order your, 700, t-shirts that you want to sell at your store, now we can start doing business through the telephone. We can place orders, we can check on supplies, and so on. Another new industry in the 1920s is aviation. Glenn Curtiss discovers the hydroplane. The first flight was the Wright brothers, and then Glenn Curtiss discovers the hydroplane that could take off and land on water, which is going to be the beginning of the U.S. Naval aviation. Now, in modern time, we've taken this early technology and we have figured out how to land and take off from a ship out in the middle of the ocean on a runway that's, 100 yards long or so. Other new technologies are assembly line production, really. The efficiency of Ford's assembly line is going to make life better for everybody. Ford is going to produce the electric conveyor belt, which is going to move the products along the assembly line, where the workers just line up and do their one job over and over. One of the things about assembly line production is that we transition from being very skilled laborers, people who are specialized in particular production of particular goods, to being a largely unskilled, not the whole country, but we have a growth of a largely unskilled labor force. Because it doesn't take skill to screw in a bolt or tighten a nut or whatever it is that they do all day to make a car. I just talked about that. Okay. Prosperity leads to mass consumption. We go from being a society that really only purchases things that we need because we don't have space or money to purchase extra, to buying more stuff than we could have ever dreamed of. And honestly, if we look at the things that people in the 20s owned, it's still almost nothing compared to how much stuff we own now. But the availability of new products paired with the fact that people are making more money working in these factories, more people are employed, there is more money to spend. And when people got money, they love to spend it. One of the other new things of the 20s is the invention of credit, okay? The ability to buy something now but pay for it later. So if you ever hear your parents talk about their mortgage, their car payment, these are big purchases that you make as an adult that most people cannot afford to pay for all at one time. Like when I bought my house, I didn't have the hundreds of thousands of dollars in my bank account to pay for that house. So I make a down payment, I pay a small amount up front, and then I pay the rest of it over time. This invention of credit is going to allow people to buy stuff they can't afford, right? To buy products that maybe they've been wanting, maybe they've been eyeballing that radio or they've been eyeballing that washing machine, but they can't afford to pay for all of it up front. So they can buy it on credit and make small payments each month. This is going to allow people to purchase and consume more than they had consumed before. It is also going to, it's also going to change the way that consumers think about purchasing and the way that manufacturers set their prices. Because in the 1920s, you could buy a whole entire house in a catalog for like $5,000. Well, if everybody can afford to buy this house because lots and lots of people are working and they have access to credit, those companies start to creep up the price because they know they can charge more. People will just take out the credit to purchase it. So it's gonna change how pricing is done too. And then, I think this is the last one, yeah. Speculation and the stock market go together. Y'all know what speculation is? Y'all heard of land speculators?
Like
No.
predicting prices.
Say again?
Like predicting prices.
Kind of, so, sort of. Well, they definitely use this, kind of method of prediction to determine what to buy. How many of y'all ever seen those like home improvement shows where they flip houses? What's the goal of that? They make it look nice so that they can make money, right? They go in, they put the bare minimum amount of money into that house that they possibly can, so that they can sell it for maximum profit, later down the road. When they bought that house, they never intended to keep it. They intended to sell it for a profit. That is speculation. What people do in the 20s is they speculate in real estate, in land. They buy land that they think is going to increase in value, that they can sell at a higher price later on to make a profit. But they also do this in the stock market. Okay, so they purchase stocks that they're watching the price of the stock, and that price is rising and rising and rising. So they are borrowing money from the banks, going and purchasing this stock in the stock market with the goal of selling it when it peaks at like its highest value. The problem is you don't really know when it reaches the top until it starts to fall. So you hold on to it a little bit too long and you lose money. So this speculation is going to lead to economic problems, money problems for the country, particularly in the stock market. Now, the stock market is where corporations can buy and sell shares of their company. You can invest in a company, essentially buy a part ownership in that company with the goal of making money. When that company makes money, you get paid for those shares. You get a percentage of the profits based on however much money you have invested or whatever percentage of ownership you have in the stock market. The more people buy, the higher the price of the stock goes. So as people are speculating, they're borrowing lots and lots of money to purchase stock in the stock market. It looks like the stock market's doing great because it's continuing to grow and grow and grow. What actually happens though in the 20s is that this heavy purchasing in the stock market leads to a bubble. And a bubble is like inflation that's not real. That's not like the value of the products of the companies you're buying stock in is getting better or higher value. It's that you're artificially making it look like that company is worth more money because people are buying stock. That's going to lead to problems that happen in 1929. Okay, we'll stop there for today.